spend more time in my basement than your own?
Shut up! I'm trying to be sad. Stop ruining my mood.
Do you have to be sad in my basement? Can't you be sad at your house?
No.
Okay then.
Just let me be sad in peace, okay?
Jesus, fine. What's got you so upset?
X-Men.
Well, I didn't like X-Men Origins Wolverine either, but I'm not doing this.
No, I don't mean that. Let me show you.
Be a bad idea. Yikes, dude. I thought the trailer fucking sucked too, but you don't see me crying about it.
It's not that. It's just that this is the last X-Men movie.
Isn't there also New Mutants?
Yes. But
And what about all those MCU movies coming down the pipe, huh?
shut up already.
Fine. Oh.
You don't understand. This is a really emotional moment for me. The saga that I've been watching, that I've loved since I watched the first X-Men movie on a shitty VHS in my own house, and not this dump, is ending. And that's sad. So here I've been, squatting in your house, eating your chips and drinking your Dr. Pepper to cheer myself up.
Is it working?
No, not really.
Can't you be sad somewhere else? I mean, it's bad enough that we film couch potatoes in all your reviews here, but like, can't you have this weird depressive episode at your house?
Hey guys, it is summer again. Cannot wait to film another couch potatoes with you.
Oh, god damn it, if it's not the clones, it's you guys. Does everybody I know live at my house?
Yes.
At least I left you your chicken wings.
What hot wings?
Look, can't you do something that doesn't involve eating all my chips and drinking my Dr. Pepper? It's my job. Don't you have that X-Men retrospective that you keep forgetting about?
Are you saying that you want me to do another X-Men review of the X-Men movies I've actually liked to cheer myself up from the fact that the saga's ending?
If that gets you out of my house, then fine. Just clean this up before you do.
Thanks, dude. Thanks for the good advice. This is why you're such a good friend.
Does that mean we're not going to be shooting another couch potatoes today?
I'll deal with you later.
This is it. The long-awaited, or perhaps long-feared, ending of the X-Men saga. This time next year, the X-Men will be little more than a spark in Kevin Feige's billion-dollar eye. Or maybe something else will happen. I know I'm very bad at predicting these things. To honor the occasion, let's talk about the best two X-Men movies. Yeah, I like X2 as much as the next hipster, but let's be real. First Class and Days of Future Past are better. Because writing jokes about things you like is a lot harder than riffing on things that you don't. I'm gonna review both of them at once. Because I'm lazy.
Time's up.
Time's up.
Time's up!
Time is up. Folks, time's up.
Time's up!
See? Who said X-Men isn't progressive? That being said, there are good reasons to review these movies at the same time besides my laziness. In reviewing these two together, we can consider what made these particular X-Men films good compared with those lackluster movies that came before and after. First, let's review Matthew Vaughn's Kick-Ass, Matthew Vaughn's Kingsman of the Secret Service, Matthew Vaughn's X-Men First Class. Look, they're all the same movie. It gets confusing, okay? After X-Men Origins Wolverine was released, and well, nobody liked it at all, the producers over at Fox were scratching their head. They needed to make more X-Men movies and keep the dollars rolling in and keep the rights, but they had no idea how to do that. They didn't know what creative direction they were going for. They did have several scripts floating around, but since Origins Wolverine didn't work, they suddenly started worrying about every other movie they had out in development. One of these was the proposed follow-up to Origins Wolverine, which would have been an Origins Magneto film. The script was described as roughly The Pianist with superpowers. Another was a possible adaptation of the X-Men First Class comic book. Longtime X-Men producer Lauren Schuler-Donner, who is a badass, decided to do both at once. Matthew Vaughn, director of Kick-Ass, who had previously been attached to X-Men 3, signed on. Him and his writing partner Jane Goldman rewrote the script into what became the shooting script, and then they made the fucking movie. First Class is currently the lowest grossing film in the series, so it's the one you get the most hipster points for having seen. I, obviously, watch it every weekend for that very reason. It's also one of the better reviewed X-Men films in the series, and I certainly think it deserves it. The film is a little rough around the edges and feels not quite finished, but what it does fairly well. If you, like Matthew Vaughn, make the same movie 3 times, the least you can do is make it well. Since this is the internet and you all live on negativity, let's shit on the movie I love before I praise it. Sounds good. First and foremost, this movie doesn't look great visually, at least consistently. The sets and the cinematography take a lot of inspiration from 60s Bond, and the aesthetic is generally pretty good, but it's very clear that the budget is being stretched to its limits. Instead of costing Justice League money, it cost Shazam money. Sometimes the special effects are just blatantly unfinished, and they look like they came out of the shitty video game tie-in that they never made. Beyond that, the story is sometimes a little bit hard to get into. The enormous amount of cast members involved risks a loss of focus. Modern MCU team-up movies also suffer from this problem, but 1,000 times worse. Talking about you, Endgame. With all the stories and the characters involved in this film, it's a little bit hard to find a single thread to latch onto and get involved with. You basically got 3 main stories that each take a while to develop, and then they crash into each other. You got Professor X and Mystique, you got Magneto Revenge, and then you got evil villain guy doing villain stuff. Put it this way, for you youngsters who have never watched an X-Men movie in your life, there's a reason why Stranger Things Season 1 was better than Stranger Things Season 2. First Class is an origin story, first and foremost, for Magneto, Professor X, and to a lesser extent, Mystique. In this movie, like a lot of origin stories, is really 2 or 3 stories that happen to take place at roughly the same time. We have our main characters learning to use their powers and self-actualize while the bad guys do their thing in the corner, and then they just meet here and there. We have the stories of Magneto, Professor X, and Magneto as they meet in their most formative moments. Magneto is seeking revenge for the death of his mother instead of fighting with the rights for mutant kind. Professor X is an idealistic young man recently graduating from Harvard, and Mystique is his adopted younger sister who struggles with self-acceptance. Now, I'm sure that making Mystique much closer to Professor X causes all kind of havoc with the comics, and causes havoc in future sequels too, but let me let you into a little secret. I don't care. It makes the character dynamics and interactions more interesting in this movie and in Days of Future Past, and that's what matters. It causes interesting, different dynamics that cause character conflict and cause them to grow, versus Mystique in the other movies where she's just a sexy lizard girl. And I know all of this is completely different from the comics, but at least it's well written. Usually in this kind of superhero origin story, I would say that the villain was boring and generic and just kind of took up space while the original origin story stuff was fun. I'm sure you could name a dozen movies like that, all coming out this fall from Marvel Studios. First Class is the rare superhero origin story where the villain is just as entertaining as the leads. Granted, Sebastian Shaw, the villain, isn't especially well written. He's just a generic mutant antagonist with the motivations of Magneto, but without all that nuanced motivation and backstory. He's just mean and evil and doesn't like humans. That's why when you remember who the bad guy of First Class was, you don't say Sebastian Shaw. You say that the villain of First Class was Kevin Bacon. I swear, without X-Men First Class, I would not be able to play 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. I haven't seen that many movies, okay? He's just so much fun in this movie. Listen, for all you MCU stans who have never watched an X-Men movie in your life, imagine, like, watching Michael Keaton in Spider-Man Homecoming, except better. Overall, based on all this, I would recommend X-Men First Class. It just feels so different from basically every other superhero movie released today. It's almost like a portal into another universe where superhero movies took a different course. It's as unique and different as every other X-Men movie, but without all the unique ways that X-Men movies suck. It's not overtly or stupidly political as the other movies are, and it treats its source material with a little bit more respect. I'm also happy to report that there's no miscast person who really doesn't want to be there, as later movies and earlier movies definitely have. It's just a really sincere, well-made movie.
Is the future truly set?
X-Men Days of Future Past is my favorite X-Men movie and probably one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. It came out in a very special time in my life. It was probably the first X-Men movie I remember catching in theaters. I was just starting to get into movies at the time, and I was just about to become friends with the Zabelman, and I'd grown up with X-Men DVDs and VHSs in the living room. They were some of my favorite movies. As a Star Trek fan, I loved Patrick Stewart. The ticket price to see the Wolverine was worth it just because of that end credits scene. Is this what it's like to be a comic book fan? Is this what it's like to be excited about things? No, I don't know. I haven't felt that before or since. I'm very lonely and sad. Beyond being a film I was incredibly excited about seeing, it was a movie that didn't disappoint when I actually saw it. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Oh, it's such a good movie. I love it so much. Listen, I'm sorry, I apologize, but this section of the review is just going to be me shitting on Endgame and fanboying on all over X-Men, so just consider yourself forewarned. Take that, Avengers! X-Men did time travel to undo an apocalyptic thing but 5 years before you guys, and better. Days of Future Past doesn't really stand on its own, at least as much as X-Men First Class, and I'll admit that. Part of why I like this movie is the fan service that it gives me as a fan of the original trilogy of X-Men films. But beyond that, I do think that it's a very solid emotional story at its heart, and that part, if nothing else, stands on its own. So while watching the other X-Men films might help you fully appreciate this one, it does not mean that you can't understand it on its own merits, unlike some other movies I could mention. Besides that, it's a really well-made movie. It's the best looking and perhaps best directed film in the series. Bryan Singer, whomst is bad, is a very good director when he actually is involved and engaged in the project. And when he's not... As far as I'm concerned, Days of Future Past sets the gold standard for how good superhero movies can look. Just look at the pretty colors. They're so colorful and pretty. If you're gonna have a bunch of hot people in spandex shooting lasers at each other from their genitalia, the very least you could do is make it colorful. And this movie does. The future segments especially are some of the best looking superhero action scenes ever made, save perhaps a couple of MCU films and the occasional DC film. Even its own sequel didn't look that good. But we'll get to that. The soundtrack is also excellent. In fact, the soundtrack for this film and First Class are both excellent. Both themes and both soundtracks are very awesome and inspiring, and the X-Men theme from the intro sequence of Days of Future Past will never fail to pump me up for anything. I could be doing anything at all, and then that song will come on, and I'll instantly be a badass. At least I can remember it 5 minutes after I've heard it. Can't say that about a Marvel movie soundtrack. One teeny-weeny complaint I had with this movie is probably its entire story structure. In the Days of Future Past comic book, at least from what I've heard, there's more of an equal emphasis on the future as well as the past storylines. In the film, the future segments function more of a framing device for the main story, as well as action scenes and tension than an co-equal story. But the faithfulness isn't probably what bothers me as much about this story. It's obvious that screenwriter Simon Kinberg, working off a story by Jane Goldman and Matthew Vaughn, used the story more as inspiration than direct source material for his own plot. I'm gonna be honest, the plot and the time travel story is honestly the weakest part of the movie. The time travel works well enough and is more internally coherent than some other films I could mention, but that's not a high bar to cross. And I could bring my favorite part of any X-Men review, which is nitpicking, but if I mentioned that, it doesn't make sense that Magneto breaking into the Pentagon when there's nobody there, or like Kitty Pryde suddenly having time travel powers, or Patrick Stewart from the future deciding they needed Magneto despite the fact that he's so unreliable, and I could do all of that and make fun of it in like a silly bit, but I don't think that really matters. I could go on, but I think I've proven my point. Simon Kinberg in his X-Men screenplays tends to not do so well on writing coherent plots with logical stories, and we'll get to Apocalypse next time. What really works about Days of Future Past is the characters and their arcs. The plot, the framing device, and all those fancy special effects I love so much all revolve around the central emotional story of our characters. And this brings me back to my complaint about this structure. To explain what bothered me so much about the story, I want to talk about the Rogue Cut. After Days of Future Past came out in May of 2014 to the best box office returns of the entire series, Fox saw dollar signs in their eyes and decided to release the Rogue Cut on DVD and Blu-ray, which was an extended cut of the film featuring a subplot about Anna Paquin's Rogue replacing Kitty Pryde as the person teleporting Wolverine's consciousness to the 1970s, as well as replacing another couple of deleted scenes here. And it sucked. The pacing of the entire movie in the third act was ruined by adding that extra scene that had nothing to do with the story aside from, giving Rogue something to do. And I bring this up because it's something that I initially saw as a weakness for the film, but now I think I don't see it as much of a weakness anymore. When I first saw the movie, I looked at it as a flawed masterpiece because there was a lot more than I wanted out of it. I came to realize that's not such a bad thing. I would have liked to see more of my favorite characters like Rogue, like Iceman, like Magneto. Sometimes the ending is frustrating because you don't get the Aristea for each and every character that you wanted. That word's Greek, look it up. You don't get all the fan service you want. And because of that, I used to think that it would have been better to get 2 movies out of X-Men Days of Future Past, one in the future and one in the past. But then I got that and realized that maybe I didn't want that after all. What's so excellent about Days of Future Past is that it has the guts to kill its darlings. There's plenty of fan service, but when that fan service, like Rogue, distracts from the main story, they cut it. I think many of the films that release these days don't do that anymore. In not giving us everything that an X-Men fan would have wanted, the creative team pulls off an emotionally satisfying conclusion that is well-paced and efficiently told. I get to see the conclusion for all the X-Men that I grew to love and I know so well, as well as this new generation of X-Men and their storylines. I was honestly just so excited and so pumped up when I saw the end credit scene promising something brand new in the X-Men series. Now that the mistakes of the X-Men trilogy had been rectified, the stage was set for a new series of epic adventures that I'd always been waiting to see. The possibilities of the franchise were endless. I only had to wait, and the X-Men movies of my dreams would just drop right into my lap. Oh shit. Did I just write a review of Avengers Endgame?